What was life like before smartphones? Story 1. If you wanted to go somewhere, you had to already know how to get there, or consult a paper map which you kept in your car. If you needed to call somewhere, a store, your bank, the vet, a car repair place, you had to look the number up. This could be on your desktop computer at home, or longer ago than that, in a phone book. If you had a random thought like, when was air conditioning invented? Or, how far is it to Argentina? Or, how old is Dick Van Dyke? Generally, you would just keep wondering. You weren't used to being constantly entertained. On a car trip, or in a waiting room, or in a long line, you would watch other people, think about things, maybe read a book. People were more comfortable just sitting with their thoughts. People took a lot fewer pictures. If you went on vacation or had a family event, you would bring a camera and take pictures. Then you would drop the film off at a store and get your pictures a few days later. An hour later, if you wanted to spend a lot. You never knew till you picked them up if the shots were any good, or if someone's eyes were closed or your finger got in the way of the lens. Story 2. Days seemed to be so much longer. Felt like there was so much more time for things. Life was private. When I saw someone I hadn't seen for a long time, it was genuinely interesting to see how they were doing and the crazy adventure they had been living. Dang, I need to get rid of my smartphone. Life is honestly worse with one. These things are a fucking ball and chain. Story 3. Ironically, it was easier to get a hold of someone when you needed to talk to them urgently. Today, people will see your name on their phone and think, I'll call them back later. I get sent to voicemail now far more than ever. Also, it was okay to just show up unannounced at someone's house without texting or calling first. Not so much today. Story 4. Life before is more interesting and more enjoyable before smartphones took over. Have you ever tried to text someone without looking at your phone? Your muscle memory already knows what and where to type on your phone. Codes you already memorized which key you're going to press. Imagine texting you crush while on your class without being caught by your teachers that you are using your phone. Imagine that. Story 5. The iPhone came out the year before I graduated HS, and honestly, before everyone had a camera in their pocket, everyone was excited to be on camera. Just check out any nostalgia videos of high schools in the 2000s and you'll see. We were all stoked to be on camera. We didn't fuss about what we looked like beforehand. We just hopped in. I remember being excited to get home and hop on my PC to message my friends on AIM and thinking to myself, wouldn't this be so cool if I could do it from my phone? Of course, texting was a thing, and there was an AIM to phone method, but texting sucked because of the number pads, and it cost money per text. Honestly, I was always obsessed with the newest tech thing back then. Now I'm not. Technology has stagnated, especially in the phone realm. Everything looks like the same candy bar. I miss those days. Story 6. If you wanted to argue with someone, you had to find facts for your argument in books and newspapers. If you wanted to know where your friends were, you looked for their bikes around town. Also, we played outside unsupervised till the streetlights came on. Plus, a 10 p.m. television reminder for parents to check on their kids. Story 7. Proper conversations, not people staring into a screen. Have a laugh, or cry, or argue without people filming it. Nights out weren't selfies and constant picture-taking. We'd dance, get drunk and fall over without the fear of being plastered all over social media. Life before smartphones were great! Story 8. We used telephone books to find people's phone numbers, then called their house and awkwardly spoke to their dad and asked if the person you wanted to talk to could come to the phone. If you had to meet up somewhere and one person was late, hopefully they could get to a payphone, there were everywhere, and call home to leave a message with a person who could relay it to you when you called to check on them. Story 9. Quieter, more private. Closest you had to social media was LiveJournal. DeadJournal if you were edgy or dressed in all black. A lot more planning since once you were out of the house, you were essentially off the grid. If you wanted to find someone, you'd check the local hangouts. It was a lot more social while maintaining more privacy, which kinda sounds weird. My generation was the last before smartphones were a thing. I'm grateful for the experience, and I greatly miss it. Story 10. We had to work a little bit harder to get our dopamine fix. Some of us actually had to go out and talk to people. We had to go experience things in person. Hearing a great song was super special, as we did have access to the entire category of any song ever recorded on our fingertips. Taking a picture of something was very special, and it had to be worthy of the film and the cost of getting it developed. Taking a movie was a darn near production with a camcorder, and again it had to be worthwhile. When people were stopped at red lights, they would actually start driving when the light turned green. Now many people don't even notice when the light has changed. Story 11. You memorize so many phone numbers. I still remember the number of old friends' homes. IDK if anyone actually still lives there though. And you had to keep a little book of contact info for everyone from best friends to pastors to your favorite plumber cleaning service. The yellow pages were a real thing and they were really thick. The attorney section was huge. And yeah, if you were traveling and in a pickle, you may look something up in the yellow pages in a phone booth. And if no one answered, you might just rip that whole page out and try again later. You would leave messages for friends on their home recording device that used a physical tape cassette. If you were traveling, you could leave a message with the reception and hope that they caught them, or reception would write a note and have it delivered to their room. Called ID was a game changer for solicitors, and even for the chatty neighbor you really didn't want to deal with. If something was urgent, it might have to wait. If you can't find them at a phone immediately, it would just be whenever they got home and decided to check their answering machine. And of course, driving somewhere or walking somewhere and knocking on someone's door was much less strange, especially for children. Edit. Oh, and you asked people for directions, and you looked at maps. Maybe you had the old Rand McNally in the glove box. Traveling around LA was insane. They had a big book and you would know which neighborhoods were on which pages. So you could tell someone which page in the book and then tell them like AG and 1, 9, and you would coordinate the letters and number and find the location like that. The maps in my pocket is what made me get an iPhone. Story 12. Beautiful. I grew up playing in the street with the children of the neighborhood. Even if we weren't friends, and we were of different ages, we would all meet in the street to play hide and seek, and we could basically only hide behind parked cars, or football. We were rarely at home, and our parents would have to call us from the window. Life was more calm, I guess. It feels more frenetic now with smartphones. We're constantly refreshing to see if we received a new message or something. I remember when my friend moved away, we would exchange letters, and waiting for the reply was kind of funny. Now we need an immediate reply, always, and it's stressful because most of the times I forget I read the message or IDK what to reply and I just ignore it even for weeks, and then people gets mad. I would rather call and talk for hours than listening to hours-long audio. IDKY, but I felt like I had all the time in the world. I would play with the other children for hours, and it felt like we were for such a short time. We were having so much fun and time passed, but it felt slower. Today I feel like time lasts more quickly. You take your phone, blink, and then 2 hours have passed just like this. It feels like nothing gets done. IDK how to explain it. I love taking hundreds of authentic photos. Immortalize the moment rather than looking for the perfect picture to post on social media for likes. I have hundreds of bad photos, all blurred, but I can still remember the joy I felt in that moments. They are perfect, but they captured the moment. I think we used to live more the moment to feel it. I lived through the change. At first, we used to maybe just take pics or put music on. Then we transitioned to basically spend all the time with our face glued to the phone instead of enjoying the moments and talking to each other's. Coffee date? 20 minutes before you can actually touch your coffee and pastry, because your friend wants the perfect picture to post on Instagram. I also think we are too much surrounded by hate today. Just think about all the hate comments, negativity on social media. It's like people fell enabled by the anonymity to be toxic and send out all their frustrations, to intentionally hurt others to feel better themselves. It's shitty. I've had a pretty shitty childhood due to my school bullies, but I was glad it ended there. They couldn't haunt me outside of school. In high school, I realized how lucky I was when I was able to forget about it just for a moment. We used to get our first cell phone at around 11/13, and all it could do was call or send texts. No internet connection, no WhatsApp, no social media, no camera. I didn't feel as anxious as today, especially because we didn't risk being photographed or filmed without our consent if posted on social media for laughs or anything. It's hard to remember a time like that. It seems like it was a dream. Story 13. As someone who can't stand falsehoods and misinformation, it was frustrating when people said things you knew were false, but couldn't prove on the spot. Now, people have almost been forced to be less full of shit, but for the ones that spew BS for whatever reason, it's usually easy to correct it right on the spot. I love that when there is a disagreement on a fact, you can simply Google it. Story 14. Grass always greener and all that. It was way less stressful. Today we are scheduled out to the minute and reachable at any time with an expected response time of 0.05 seconds. In the 80s as a kid, I would leave the house on my bike in rural PA in the morning and come home at night and never even check in with my folks. They were great parents and not at all neglectful, just the way it was then. Story 15. It was possible to be bored. For example, imagine waiting in line at the bank and having nothing to do but stare at the things around you. Imagine waiting in line for an hour or more for an amusement park ride and running out of things to talk about with the person you're with. Imagine having to sit through church and actually listen to what was being said. Imagine pooping without being able to play Angry Birds or Candy Crush. On the plus side, we weren't constantly being inundated with nonsense from the loudest, stupidest members of our population. Story 16. There wasn't a big difference. You had to look up information you might need before leaving the house. For instance, when I took a train to Munich, I looked up the departure times of my trains back home and printed them out or wrote them down. You had to navigate with a paper map, And of course you needed one for each city you went to. In the end, I had a stack of about 20 of those. Before the internet, you had to go to a travel agency when you wanted to book a flight. That was nasty, because they saw the prices and you didn't, so you had to wait for them to tell you. Or you could also call the airline. That worked too. If you wanted to listen to some music, you had to bring a Walkman or an MP3 player. If you wanted to watch a movie, well, no one did that. On the train, I mean. Oh, and you had to be on time and not change any plans you had agreed upon. You couldn't just show up a little later or wait at a different cafe. I mean, you could, but then you wouldn't see your friend that day. Story 17. A lot more bullshitting went on, not necessarily in a bad way. As a kid, if my uncle taught me anything, I just blindly believed him because there was no way for me to fact-check it. This actually meant that people in your local community had more clout because if anyone had any knowledge of any skill, they were literally the only ones who could teach you or solve the problem for you. You couldn't just look up a YouTube video or wiki article. I looked up to and relied on more people, which brought the community more close together. Now I can rely on myself via my Uncle Google for all the answers. Story 18, it was more peaceful, MO. Before phones in general, Noon had the expectation that they can reach you 24/7. You also had more time to think in various situations like being on a road trip, in a line, etc. People were also more comfortable talking with strangers. You could healthily disagree because Noonie was part of any echo chambers, so everyone was still in the mindset of figuring things out rather than proving things right or wrong. Maybe rose-tinted glasses. There were a lot of uncomfortable things like having to figure out directions or figuring out phone numbers or even simple answers that are just one click away these days. But IDK, the simplicity was nice, and it afforded less reasons to stress. At least for me. Story 19. My therapist made a good point. Before cell phones came along, people had a better grasp, generally, of anxiety. We had to adjust and develop resilience because things were so uncertain. We didn't have the security then that phones give us now. Now we can't handle stress and anxiety as well anymore because we have a constant security blanket. We don't have to worry about emergencies and such because we have a constant lifeline. But alternatively, if something bad actually does happen, we are ill-equipped with the mental fortitude it would take to overcome the issue. Back before cell phones, I thought nothing of hopping in my car and going on long trips by myself. Now I panic if I don't have my phone, and can't go anywhere without it. It's like taking a step back instead of forward. But you mentioned smartphones specifically. Before smartphones, you sat down in front of your PC at your desk, or at the library to look up the information that you needed. Smartphones have made everything easier, and we've all been spoiled because of them. Story 20. It's almost hard to remember, but it wasn't all that long ago. You met your friend at the mall and talked about where you planned to meet, since you'd have no way to get a hold of them once you left the house. You called your mom for rides on payphones. You'd have to look for a phone if you were out and needed to make a call. But they also had them on every block downtown, and most corner stores had them outside. I remember when cell phones first started to become popular. It's mind-blowing to think how far we've came from car phones to bag phones to bricks to flips, and now the smartphone we have today. Story 21. We just had a bigger selection of print magazines to read from, all with the same information as we now do on our phones, minus the hard-to-read and annoying ads. There were ads in the magazine, but they were never annoying. We had separate dedicated hardware for gaming, just a Game Boy, then Advance, then DS, and 3 deciseconds. It is much better than the dumb phone cash grabs. Reading was a lot better and more informative as well. Magazines had character and the articles were actually good. Today's writers are burned out from the cost-cutting. Online articles are often short and rushed because they compete with video for our attention, so it's become cutthroat. Before on the Toliet, you only had magazines and books to compete with. Now the Toliet time competes with everything. I can run everything from my phone. So that type of competition kills print media as print is slow. But gaming and cheap YouTube videos are fast and easy to produce. It was a better time definitely, but you learn things slower. Nowadays I learn much faster with the internet and video tutorials. Story 22. Here's an interesting take that I don't see people discuss much. Things had staying power. A joke you'd see on TV would continue to be funny for a longer amount of time, because it wasn't constantly repeated every 3 seconds by everyone. Memories were a lot more special because there was a good chance you didn't have pictures or videos of a certain thing that happened. You just saw and experienced it. Think about Hawk Tuah. Most people are already completely burned out on it, think it's really dumb, and it's basically done as a joke. Versus something like Leroy Jenkins, which, since you didn't have instant access to it at any given time, stayed funny for literally years. Story 23. If you didn't know a band or the name of a song, it could be days, weeks, or months even before you caught it again on the radio. Going to the movies required checking the newspaper to see what was playing at the local theater or call Movie Fo-E. Then you'd have to show up and wait in line to buy tickets and hope it was sold out by the time you got there. If it was, you had to wait around for the next showtime, but make sure to call your parents on a payphone and let them know so they wouldn't come to get you early. Story 24. You see, back in those days, rich men would ride around in Zeppelins dropping coins on people, and one day, I seen J.D. Rockefeller flying by. So I run out of the house with a big wash tub and, anyway, about my wash tub. I just used it that morning to wash my turkey, which in those days was known as a walking bird. We'd always have walking bird on Thanksgiving, with all the trimmings, cranberries, Injun eyes, and yams stuffed with gunpowder. Then we'd all watch football, which in those days was called baseball.